lived in a castle. I grew up on the outskirts of town. No dresses with golden tassels. The rings on my hand are handed down. But I'm gonna find the one that needs me, sees me, and treats me like I'm already royalty. There ain't nothing priceless on my wrist. I might not fly private, but that don't mean I ain't a queen. Queens don't hate, queens don't fight, queens don't stay unless their king treats her right. Oh, every door on my crown, you better believe I earned it. Don't keep people around that don't believe I deserve it. Oh, queens ain't fake, queens gonna rule just the way she was made. Oh, I ain't got to let nobody come and take me off this throne. Some girls might, but queens don't. No, I don't need the tallest tower to prove to anyone I ain't weak. I turn my pain into power.
Welcome. Hi, I'm Hanan. I'm the program specialist at Chic Geek, and thank you for joining us today. We're excited to host this Fireside chat with Pamela Slim. We had the pleasure of connecting with Pamela a couple of years ago when she was the keynote at our Geeky Summit Women in Tech conference. And as she gears up to launch her latest book, we're getting the inside scoop on the concepts in the Widest Net. So before we begin, I wanted to let you know that Chic Geek exists because we're not, there's just not enough women in tech. And women, we do know, are leaving. So we're here to change that. We believe through mentorship, peer elevation, and community support, we can shift the narrative. We are determined to help women find their future and forge new paths in technology because this will have a bold and beneficial impact on the future and the tech that defines it. Before we continue, Chic Geek stands for diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. We support reconciliation, and we believe we all have a role to play in harmonious relationships between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. A land acknowledgement is a traditional custom of Indigenous people when welcoming outsiders onto their land and into their homes. To build respectful relationships, acknowledging this land is an important part of reconciliation. It honors the authentic history of Turtle Island, presently known as North America, its original people, and tells the creation story of our country that has been historically missing. In gratitude, I acknowledge that we're gathering today on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which consists of Siksika, the Kainai, the Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda Nation, as well as the Métis Nation Region 3. We acknowledge all nations, Indigenous and non, who live, work, play on this land, and who honor and celebrate this territory. Thank you for your enthusiasm and your commitment to joining us for this digital event hosted on the beautiful lands of Treaty 7 territory. Okay, so let's get to the intro. I'm really excited about this. We're chatting with Pamela Slim, author of The Widest Net, about authentic relationships and inclusive community building practices. She'll discuss her ecosystem wheel model for finding new customers and audiences in a brand new way. So first of all, I'll do a brief intro to Chic Geek, then move on to our speaker, and then move right into our chat with Pamela. And at the end, as most of these kinds of events go, we'll save time at the end for audience questions because I know that you're a savvy group and you'll have some really good ones for us. So please feel free to put them in the chat throughout the discussion. Okay, so some ground rules before we get started. I want to take a moment to set this for our event today. I ask that our audience members be present and participate. It's easy to answer a few emails during these digital events, but when you're a part of the Chic Geek community, you own a piece of it, and we ask that you show up. Finally, we hope that you'll adopt the values that are really key with us and that really present in everything that we do. Our Chic Geek values, just to remind you, for those also who maybe have not seen these yet, we hope that you'll live by our values when you're with us. So our commitment to these values is what helps us create a welcoming, supportive community, and we all have the power to shape that. Okay, so this is what we are going to talk about in terms of what our values are. We are brave explorers. We step outside our comfort zones and we take bold risks. We refuse to let fear stand in our way, and we don't shy away from tough conversations. We are relentlessly curious. We are inquisitive question askers, and we're always learning something new, whether it's professionally or personally. We're constantly educating ourselves and evolving from our discoveries. And then we also believe in peer elevation. At Chic Geek, we believe that platforms like this are meant to be shared. We're always here with a helping hand, and we're not afraid to ask for one either. We strive for candid and connected relationships. We create meaningful, intentional, impactful relationships with other wonderful humans. We know that to do this requires a deep connection to self, and that fostering this connection creates space for self-compassion, discovery, and understanding. Okay, so with that, thank you for allowing me to share that with you. But with that, I am very thrilled to introduce our wonderful speaker today, Pamela Slim. So Pamela Slim, welcome. Hi.
Hello, it's so good to see you and to be back.
Well. So I'm going to give everybody a little bit of a brief on who you are. So bear with me. You've probably heard this a lot, but I think it's really important that people know who you are in a real in-depth way before we start our chat. So Pamela's an author, a community builder, and a consultant. She focused her first decade in business on creating and delivering training programs for large companies such as HP, Charles Schwab, 3Com, Chevron, Cisco Systems. So, you know, like really small folks in the industry. And then since 2005, Pam has advised thousands of entrepreneurs as well as companies serving small business, such as Infusionsoft, Progressive Insurance, Constant Contact, which most of us use on a regular basis, and of course, Prezi. So Pam also, and this makes me super excited as well, you partnered with the author Susan Cain to build and launch the Quiet Revolution and the Quiet Leadership Institute, which I just absolutely love. And I personally have used some of those principles myself. So that's really exciting. But you are also best known for your book, Escape from Cubicle Nation, which was named Best Small Business and Entrepreneur Book of 2009, along with your follow-up book, Body of Work. Both were published by Penguin Portfolio, and you've got this upcoming book, which I believe launches, is that today?
No, November 11th. We've had
November 11th. Okay.
Chain issues here, so November 11th it should be.
November 11th. So your upcoming book, The Widest Net, will be published by McGraw-Hill. And then also in 2016, you know, because you weren't busy enough, and you're so well, you know, you've got so much on your plate. You've also launched the Main Street Learning Lab in Mesa, Arizona, a grassroots community-based think tank for small business economic acceleration. Whew. Welcome, Pam. You've done a lot.
I am so glad to be here. And yes, we keep busy over here. And at the same time, there's a lot of joy and creative space as well. And can I just say, I'm so happy to see a land acknowledgement. I remember when I was there in person that happened in Canada. We're here in the traditional lands of the Akumal Atam. We have 22 federally recognized tribes here in Arizona, and my husband is Diné or Navajo. And so a lot of work we do here is with Native people. And I just want to really appreciate Chic Geek for acknowledging that as we kick off.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you for recognizing where you are and also the nations that represent there. That's wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to get into our first question. I just want to congratulate you first and foremost on your third book, The Widest Net.
Thank you.
Can you share with us the key concepts behind the first two books, and then how The Widest Net then builds off of those two?
Absolutely. So I always introduce myself as really an author practitioner because I tend to write about things that I'm seeing every day in my work. And that really is the way my work evolves, and it tends to be the way that books get written. I was a management consultant. I started my business 25 years ago in Silicon Valley, as you said in the intro. And I spent 10 years always working on the human side of business. I've always loved it, just fascinated as to how companies grow, how you build teams, how it is that you lead and motivate people. And so in that work that was really enjoyable inside a lot of companies that had a lot of cubicles, I tended to find a lot of people who would pull me aside and say, how did you do it? How did you actually lead to start a business? And that, when I moved to Arizona after I met and fell in love with my husband, Daryl, that really was the beginning of Escape from Cubicle Nation. So I started my blog in 2005. And the intention was really to be providing specific information for folks who wanted to make that transition out of corporate. Looking at the different statistics you had queued up at the beginning of our time here, It's really stunning. Looking, and here in the States, I don't know if you have the same thing in Canada. We're talking about the Great Resignation. That there are many, many, many people every day who are leaving. But my approach with Escape from Cubicle Nation in the first book is really to help people who are making that consideration to really take a solid look at it. I would always say hating your job intensely is not a business plan. And so I wanted to give people the tools to actually start, usually with a side hustle, and have a viable financial business if they decided to leave. And also in realizing what was involved, if it didn't really make sense for them, to make a good decision to stay and make work better, because that's a really great viable solution for some people. So where Escape really just helped people to leave the structure of corporate into working for yourself, Body of Work evolved from so many conversations that I was having with people. First, where once they got out on their own, they really started to look at, what is that work that I really want to do? What is that work that makes a difference to the world, that lights me up? And I found that the way we were describing career paths was very traditional, based on what I saw my grandparents and parents do, which is either you take the path of working for yourself or you take the path of working for corporate. And that was just not the reality that I found for many people. People were moving between different work modes. They might work for themselves, then they'd go back to work for a company, start a nonprofit, work for an agency. And so I really wanted to create a framework that allowed us to really put the focus of our work, which is really germane to the conversation today, around that body of work that you want to create. How can you use your life force, your skills, your gifts to make a positive difference in the world according to your specific measures? So Body of Work was really about that. And then as I work with people on that, the first question just about everybody asked if they were starting was, where do I find my customers? Like, now I know what I want to do. I have a movement. I want to get the word out. How do I connect with people? Or for people who had been in business, they might say, I know that I've really had success in this one particular area. I want to branch out and go somewhere new. Or for folks that were on the career path, I've really enjoyed working in this particular industry or in this type of position, but I feel like I could be doing other things. How do I really navigate that? And that's where the method for the Widest Net really came about, is doing that work with clients. And then we also used it here at the Main Street Learning Lab as the main method for building a very inclusive community here.
Great. Thanks for giving us a little sort of summary of the three books together. So that we understand that there's sort of like a really traditional way of designing your career, and you've talked a little bit about that. So coming across professionally sort of within this empire culture, this terminology around empire culture. And then I know even for myself that I didn't come from that sort of like tradition or that sort of like linear career path. So how can we think about our careers using this ecosystem wheel that you really have developed and dive into with your new book?
Yeah, so especially in the entrepreneur world, and I know that we probably have people tuning in that are working inside organizations and those that are not. So I want to address probably both of those situations. Starting in the entrepreneur world, there's a lot of language that we use that literally says, like, if you want to build a business, you want to build your empire, it's all really about you getting specific visibility for yourself, positioning yourself as really the sole expert who can solve the problem that you care to solve in your business. And in more of an empire culture, I find it tends to be more transactional. So when you're looking at ways to grow a business, there's often a quick path of just what's the way that I can pay people as little as possible in order to do the things that I don't want to do, not really taking into consideration the experience that people have who is doing that work. So there could be some pay inequity. And a lot of the focus, when you just think about empires as a metaphor, is really about control, domination. That is not the value that really runs through my work and here at the Learning Lab. My top personal values are justice and love. And so we really look at what is a way to actually see ourselves as part of a vibrant ecosystem that are really organized in order to solve the kinds of problems that we want to solve for our ideal clients. When you look at your business and building your business through that lens, the recent metaphor that I used, I just wrote this in my newsletter yesterday. It's if you could imagine that you had to save the world in 30 minutes for in the particular area you are in business, who would be that Justice League that you would call? Who are just all the best people in the overall ecosystem? Those that know how to deal with SEO, and those people who would be the best designers, and those who are the best branders and communicators. And whatever your topic is that you're focused on, you need to really identify who are those players in an ecosystem. And that same exact model applies as you're thinking about your career, because more and more, especially as you're doing work and particularly in women in technology, the conditions, the systemic conditions we know that are broken within a lot of technology companies today that are really causing a lot of women just to decide not to stay for a very good reason. And I think in order to appropriately evaluate, like what are those conditions that you really want to be in, and then who do you need to have as allies and peers to do that work, to really create that kind of body of work that's relevant to you, but in an environment that makes sense to you, you have to really have a deeper sense about what is happening in the overall ecosystem. Both what are the kinds of companies that you know are actually doing deeper work in order to address the issue, so that you don't become that lone person who's trying to fight inside a company in order to be seen or be heard or have visibility. And the same thing is true when you're looking for new opportunities in your career. Who are those kinds of people you want to learn from? What is the different kind of emerging work that you want to get exposed to? And so that when you do that, you have to have an awareness about what's out there, as opposed to just maybe reacting to a job that comes across your path, which is great. But to be deliberate about it, and especially in the context of your body of work, I think you have to have an awareness of the ecosystem.
Yeah, I really love that. I think for a lot of us who've been part of the ecosystem for a while, we can see some of the areas where maybe we don't want to move. We don't want to be a part of. And I think that part of the sort of like great resignation that's happening right now is people want to align better with the values that they have, and they want to seek out, community and have that community sort of connect with their values as well. So they're contributing to that. So I love that that's sort of like that big idea behind the Widest Net, is that, you're gathering the right folks, or you want to be connected to the right folks to help you sort of move along. So how do we then go about using, so as a woman looking to build my career in technology, how would you recommend that I think about my customers, my audience, in that regard?
Yeah, so I always think about everything really through the lens of your body of work and what you want to create. For each of us, there can be very specific things that can be energizing, maybe problems that you're really interested in solving. If you think about just the complete huge range of different kinds of things that technology facilitates, so the problems that it solves, everything from apps that you might be passionate about to particular backbone kinds of technology. I did a lot of work at 3Com and at Cisco Systems, so I learned more about switches and routers than anyone probably should who has a degree in liberal arts and is not a technologist. but it's kind of fascinating, like learning about how to build a digital backbone, and infrastructure is, a huge part of technology. So if you think about for yourself, what are some of those things that you're really excited to build and bring to life? I really think of it like the choices that you make about work. Of course, you're doing it to take care of yourself financially and your loved ones. And that's a really important part of there is never any judgment about work that we do and how we do it. Sometimes you just need to have work to pay the bills, and that's okay. When you think about that as a foundation, and then you get deliberate of all the different technology that you could facilitate building, what would be things that you would really be excited about participating in? What would be things that you're going to be excited about as a legacy? Then that can help you to focus initially on, all right, I'm really interested more in the cutting edge of productivity apps. And therefore, what would be this ecosystem where I can identify who are all the different players who are doing really interesting work? And when you begin to add some of the different layers on top of it, where you say, in order for me to be successful, these are my values. I was writing down before the Chic Geek values, of being brave, right? Having relentless curiosity, really being, connected to supporting peers, having candid and connected relationships. For each of us individually, we really want to be thinking about what are those characteristics that are important that really allow us to do our best work. And then also thinking about in that ecosystem, let's say, of these productivity apps you might be interested in helping to grow, what would be that area in which you feel you could really make a big difference? And then you begin to really kind of continue to circle around of finding, okay, of all these different ones that are there, who's doing the most interesting work? Like what is really fascinating, what would be a great place to work? And then when you can begin to dig in and understand more about founders and team culture, and what are the kinds of initiatives that they have, and what are ways that you can look to make sure that your values are aligned, that begins to give you a very specific framework for understanding how to navigate your career. It really is, it sounds so, I'm from Northern California originally, so my son always teases me because I apparently say universe a lot, and he laughs at me, even though his dad is a traditional like Navajo medicine man. But he's like, let me guess, Mom, it was the universe. And I said, yes, you're right. There's something really powerful when you do your analysis and you are able to say, of all the different companies that I want to work for, this is a company that I'm really passionate about. This is how I understand that I can really work in it. There's a very tactical thing, my son Josh would say, is that you need to communicate that to people who know you, who can help spread the word. And you need to begin to really create your own body of work to share ideas around that topic area that you're interested in working in, so that when people go and they check you out, they go on LinkedIn, they look at your social, they can see there actually is a real connection with the work that you're doing, the body of work you're creating, and working with them. I still think there's always some little magical part of the universe that is like, by just claiming it and really naming it. I have seen it probably far too often to not say, hey, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But it's very powerful when you can just be clear and direct and say, this is the vision that I see. This is the kind of environment that I want to be in. And I am really excited to be working on this particular, area. And then, then we can get into very specific tactics of how you begin to activate those networks. A lot of it is through organizations like your own, where you can, right, notice who's there, right, and see who might have connections in places where you want to be. But you have to first do that internal work to really think about what is important to me, what do I really want to create, and then make determinations about the external world in terms of your options.
So I love that, and I'm just going to sort of summarize a bit on what you said, and you can tell your son that he's a very smart individual, but I do appreciate that as his mom, you probably contributed to that as well. So what I hear from you is that really focusing in on yourself as an individual and understanding the values, and really taking that focus and then really outwardly putting it out into the world around what it is that what you desire in terms of like your values and in terms of like how you want your professional life to look at. And so I hope that that's kind of how I can summarize all the beautiful things that you just shared with us.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's in the Widest Net. They're like the first third of the book. The first is that there are 10 steps, which each are related to a chapter. And it really is a process that I found that there is a specific connection when you're really conscious about what you're building, and especially building your audience or building your community. You have to do some of these foundational things, like looking at what your mission is, what your values are, before you just begin to connect. And that's sometimes where you might say it's very common. Oh my gosh, I'm working for this greatest company in the world in terms of reputation for technology. But then you can get inside and you're like, oh my gosh, like this is a mess. And it's, not a kind of place I want to be.
Well, and I can say that, like, my coming to Chic Geek, part of coming here had a lot to do with that sort of like internal individual focus around what my values and what I wanted to contribute professionally into the world. So I really appreciate that this is a lovely book for people to pick up if they're wanting to make a change in their own world. And we talked a little bit about like making connections and like reaching out to people in a network. And so what tips do you have to build sort of like really respectful, inclusive relationships without being overbearing and creepy? And I'm sure a lot of us have been on the receiving end of like really cold emails or cold calls on LinkedIn, and not sure necessarily, it didn't always feel good to receive that. So how do we sort of like do some like high level tactics so that we can be genuine and authentic and respectful?
Absolutely. And I see there's a question in the chat from Fareen that was specifically asking about like connecting with somebody who might be a senior executive, very often who might have like layers and circles of people around them, right? In order to that becomes harder to connect.
How?
Philosophically, let's first go big picture philosophically.
Sure.
When you are clear and you say, oh my gosh, I've these couple companies are ones that feel really aligned. I'm really interested in working with them. I want to know more. Or in the case of, wanting to work with particular people or connect with particular people, you might identify them. Philosophically around relationships, I think that a lot of business education and networking education, which is one of the reasons why people dread it, is because it cuts off probably about 6 months worth of work and time and seeding and goes directly to, here's the template that will get a response from a busy executive. Now, people who write really good email templates, it's a science and an art, and I have so much admiration for it because it really is. There are things you can do in like copywriting to help people to understand why they should pay attention to you. But there's a lot of work that can happen beforehand of really taking the time, first of all, to get to know somebody. When there's a case of somebody who's a prominent individual who's creating work that you're really excited about, and that could be an executive or an entrepreneur, an artist. I always talk about John Legend. I write about him in all my books. I love his work. I love his focus on equity and social justice. And so there's a lot of work that I do to really follow his social streams, right? You can notice when there is an executive that's speaking at different events or conferences to pay attention to that, to read the company blog and read different features. Very often when you have senior folks in an organization, there could be features and stories that are very often shared on LinkedIn. And one of the great things about social media that is something that's a little bit more of an equalizer is when you begin to pay attention to that and you pay attention specifically to streams. I find personally that LinkedIn and Twitter are probably the most likely places in which you might be connecting with somebody like an executive. When you're tuned into how they're showing up and where they're in a public setting, there can be a case like something we're doing right here where they're having an interview. You have a chance to provide a question, and you can begin to make some of these initial connections with a person, or you can respond to a tweet. So maybe there's some kind of conversation going on, you join the conversation. And in this early phase, you're not saying, oh my gosh, your company is amazing, senior executive, here's my resume, can I work for you? But you're literally just beginning to show up in conversation. And I laugh sometimes with my clients at that line between creepy and strategic is one that you have to have discernment around. Because when you're really being strategic and you're paying close attention to where somebody is showing up and what is the way they're sharing information, there really are a lot of doors often open where you can begin to at least have a visual presence where they can see you commenting And they might notice over time that you respond to a certain, email newsletter or things like that. That to me is part of not being creepy. You are absolutely honoring the boundaries that somebody sets around their communication. And you're taking the time to really get to know them and how they show up and how it is that they communicate. That to me, if you do that in the earlier phases, then it can make it a lot easier, where maybe there is somebody that you meet in the Shiki community or somewhere else that actually has an individual connection. Or what I've done before, I remember the first time that I met Dan Pink in person at a conference, is I'm that nerd. I'm the person who's going to line up like early with a book. And the first time I saw him and I stood in line face to face and I said, would you please sign this? I did it with enthusiasm and without asking for anything else. But for us to be able to make that physical contact and have a human interaction meant over time, as I was communicating in virtual ways, we begin to slowly, get to know each other. So I hope it gives you a little bit of context, because if you just go to that, like, I'm just trying to break through and have a conversation, you're not really seen. The other thing I'll say that was really good advice, and I forget if I included this in the book or not, but when I wrote my first book, Escape from Cubicle Nation, Guy Kawasaki, who's the brand ambassador for Canva, had a really popular blog at the time. This was 2006 when I was just writing my blog, Escape from Cubicle Nation. And I wrote one post called An Open Letter to CEOs Across the Corporate World that I shared on a whim with him late at night. He didn't know who I was. I had a very small blog audience. He shared it on his blog, and it just absolutely broke through and really opened up my audience and ended up leading to a book deal. So we were both speaking at a conference at South by Southwest about blog to book. And we were both on the panel, which was really fun, talking about our own experience. And somebody in the audience said, how do you get the attention of busy influencers? And he said, people may think that I have the golden touch, as in everything I touch turns to gold. He said, they have it wrong. I only touch gold.
That's interesting.
Yes. So your body of work, that's why what you are creating to contribute something meaningful to that body of work that influencer or executive is creating is going to be the thing that's probably getting their attention once they do connect with you.
So the reason why I love what you just said is that I think often when people want to connect with people that they really admire, and they want to have like an ask of them, they forget sometimes that it's a little similar to, like, if I had to like move house and I needed to ask people to like help me move boxes, I'm not going to go knock on my neighbor's door and tell him, please come on Saturday at 11 o'clock to help me move. It's really about like these, the time spent developing that kind of connection and relationship with someone before even thinking about what that ask could be, and then placing the ask when it's appropriate, because you've developed something authentic and meaningful with that person first and foremost. So I love that that's kind of like the approach that you have in this book is really about, like, if you want people to be authentic, engaging with you, you have to do the same first and build that out and be very focused on why you're doing it.
Exactly. And I love the neighbor analogy because it makes so much sense of just doing little tiny things like, moving the garbage can back in their driveway when they're at work, or, little things like that. People absolutely pay attention when you are doing things in order to support them and their body of work. And it's not everything about it is very strategic, where I always call somebody who I consider to be, on my High Council of Jedi Knights, or somebody who's really I consider to be amazing, they still are equal. They may be a more experienced equal, but when you are focused on what it is that you're building and you are a partner in creating work that's meaningful, it really helps with the way that you're connecting with people. Because if you happen to, have a little bit of a connection, you meet somebody at an event, so at least they know who you are in person. And you say, hey, I just created this white paper. I saw that you were on Twitter and you were saying you're struggling with a great resignation. I have implemented this strategy about, retention of employees, and I thought it may be helpful. That's something that's actually helpful, because you're in this goal together of really building the work together as partners. And just like you said, you have to have a little bit of a relationship, or there definitely is a time and a place for cold outreach. I call it a love letter. So I think there is nothing wrong whatsoever with reaching out to somebody you admire and just saying, I think your work is amazing. Here's why I think about it. Here's why it's meaningful. I love when you did this. Keep doing it. Like, I'm so glad you're in the world. End of story. Like, you don't need to follow up with an ask. If you do, that's going to end up diluting it. But that's a perfectly appropriate part of how it is that you're getting to know somebody and building a relationship. Everybody I've ever met, regardless of their stature, appreciates having a sincere, well thought out bit of gratitude where somebody's really paying attention to the work that they're doing.
So I love the term, the High Council of Jedi Knights. I didn't notice that you are drinking from Princess Leia.
I do have my Princess Leia. I am all about Star Wars here. Yes, that was a term I used in Escape from Cubicle Nation.
I love it. I love it. And then I also love the send a love letter, because you're right. Like, how often do people that you admire, how often do they not get like those lovely love letters? And that does encourage them to continue doing the beautiful work that they do.
That's right. I had somebody who wrote for my first book, Escape from Cubicle Nation, Daryl Garcia from the Philippines. And she said, I found your book and it inspired me to quit my job and start my own business. Oh, yeah. She ended up creating Dream Architects, which is an architecture firm in the Philippines. She grew to 53 employees. And now she's a featured story in my chapter on selling in the book. And it was because she took the time to reach out. As soon as I heard that, it was so amazing to know that my book had made an impact. And so just having that thoughtful outreach, like when you have to share something, you absolutely need to be proud of that, and don't fear at all reaching out, but just take the time to realize, like, what would you like before somebody comes at you with a specific request. And then I do just want to say, this is a nuance of something that I really always want to teach when talking about networking. There can be people in your life who have relationships with the exact person who you want to connect with. And I mean, this could be your brother, it could be your best friend, it could be a lot of people. When people have their relationships that they've built through their network, through their own body of work, and especially for people that might be higher visibility, it's a very sensitive thing if you just come and say, hey, brother, would you introduce me to this CEO who you're working with in your business? Yeah. And hopefully your brother has enough discernment to say, I love you and you're my sister, but actually I won't do that, because when you ask somebody directly just to make an introduction, if there is a fit, if that person really discerns that this busy person should talk to you, they could make the introduction. But know that it can also end up eroding the trust between somebody who is connected with somebody who's super busy. And so it's just having that discernment. Try not to take it personally. I know at first I used to feel so bad if somebody would say, would you introduce me to, Susan Cain or Guy Kawasaki, amazing people. And it wasn't that I didn't want to make connections, but I knew that it would not be fair to them if I was fast tracking somebody to a connection if it wasn't strategically aligned, with work that they were doing. And so just know that it's okay to say no if somebody asks you for an introduction, if you don't feel right about it. Yeah. And what you can ask them is, what would you recommend in terms of a way maybe to get, the attention of this person?
Well, and I think that speaks back to that being respectful, right? So that is I think the pure definition of respect, and understanding that people's boundaries as well, and then access is about, is a manner of respect. So I love that. I love that sort of expansion that you shared with us. We are getting sort of onto the time in which we're going to start having questions from our audience. Do you feel comfortable with us going right there, Pamela?
I am ready. Let's go. Let's go there.
Awesome. I'm going to just, let's see. So we've got one from Kylie, but I'm going to just go to our comments and see if I can find a couple here as well.
We had Nita that was asking about the concepts. Okay, we talked about the practical tips.
Which is great.
Connecting with tech executives.
Let's go ahead and answer that question. So Pam, what's one concept lesson from the Widest Net? If there's one concept from that book that you're most excited about? I think that's a great question.
Yes, I love that too. And so the thing that was really revelatory for me that got me initially really excited about this is this concept of watering holes. So if you think about the way that I define ecosystem in the Widest Net method is we center who it is. In the case, if you're an entrepreneur and you have a customer, you would center your ideal customer in the middle of an ecosystem. And you would say, you know, what is that core problem, challenge, or aspiration that that customer has? And then who are all the different players in that ecosystem that are providing services, products, support in order to help that person do solve their problem. And of course, we as business owners are part of that net. Or in the case, if you work in a company, like who are the people who might be that company that you really want to reach and connect with, and where are they looking for resources, support, and connection to do their work? Within that ecosystem, which is pretty vast, there are 10 different segments that I talk about in the book. Okay. So it's things like associations, media hubs, service providers, other people who offer a complementary service to you, podcasts, you know, places that you can connect. A watering hole is a place in person or online where somebody very kind and generous has already taken the time and energy to build a community around that watering hole. When I first got on the plane and I went up to Canada and I spoke at your event, I stepped into this room, first of all, in this beautiful library. I was just thinking the other day about how beautiful that space was. But I stepped into this room that was filled with amazing people that were sharing this value for me about increasing equity and justice, right, and parity within the world of work. Chic Geek, you know, organization and all its community members have put that energy into building that community. So when I can show up in that watering hole, either in person or virtually, it gives me access immediately to all of these people who can be sharing some of those similar values. And that's a way you can be very strategic about the time that you spend in your marketing, because probably the biggest thing that I see sometimes when I'm working with clients or talking now on many podcasts about this book is when you do begin to look back at the big picture of all the places in which your work could be valuable and all the opportunities that you have, you begin to just see the enormity of opportunities. And then you can get kind of overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And so when you do more of then a focused analysis and you say, of all the different watering holes that I could go to, if there were one event that I could go to this year, what would be the one that is likely to have the most people who would be ideal connections for me, maybe really interesting speakers, or if there was one collaboration that I would do with a company, maybe as a sponsor, what would be that company that I want to really focus on? That can give you some discernment. And the power of watering holes is one to many. We tend to think about business of just how can I bring one person to me one at a time, or how can I be exposed to the leaders in technology one at a time by going through LinkedIn. You go to something like an event, including virtual events, and if you're really thoughtful about it and you do some strategic analysis, you can accomplish a lot of different connections. And I think that's the part of the book that gets me the most excited of just in the work that I do about connecting people with huge opportunity, and where it doesn't have to be that you're just working constantly or you're constantly spending all of your time networking with individuals.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you brought up virtual, because I think for a lot of us, virtual networking is going to be, part of our lives for a little bit longer than we actually anticipated. So that's wonderful. We are going to go to Kylie's question, which is, what are your personal favorite techniques for building relationships with people and communities in your ecosystem? Because I know that we've touched on things like LinkedIn, that's a common networking tool, but do you have a personal favorite?
So I'll give you one personal favorite that's for virtual, and then one that is for in-person. So the virtual is, I'm a big fan of a very thoughtful, well-designed 15-minute get to know you, like a Zoom or whatever kind of video call. This is something where when you identify, in particular, what I call PB&J partners, peanut butter and jelly partners. So maybe somebody that you're really wanting to connect with, that you think there could be an interest there. You can have a very specific approach to that conversation where really, if it's the first time you're connecting, your only objective is really just to get to know them, to learn a little bit more about who they are and who is that, ideal customer that they serve. So I often like to say, tell me about who is your ideal customer, like what are they like, what's important to you. And then they can ask you the same question in that really focused 15 or 20 minute conversation. You don't need to be on on Zoom for an hour. You don't need to go have coffee for, a 30-minute drive, coffee for an hour and a 30-minute drive back. It can be very focused. And I use an example of a favorite Canadian, Heather Krause, who in the book, who is a data scientist who created the initiative We All Count about increasing equity in data science, of which I am a mad, passionate fan of her work. But she is such a self-described introvert. And she said, I would, if I went to the Safeway to the Starbucks and they started to know my name, I would drive 10 kilometers to go to a different one just so they wouldn't. She resisted these conversations at first, but we created really specific structure. And it was astounding to see the impact it made of really starting her initiative, We All Count, from zero. Now she's training people, data professionals from all over the world, working with huge institutions, academic institutions. And so that is a super favorite for people who are really an interesting partner. For in-person, I'm a fan of sitting on the bench or sitting in a cafe. I love to do a lot of what we've done here locally is really just sit in public spaces and take time noticing connections and just naturally being in a place where you don't have to jump immediately in to meet somebody, and where you can just notice what are the natural patterns. Is there anybody who happens to, maybe be connected to other people? And then how can you just be somebody who is just a nice, warm, person to connect to, pulling out a chair for somebody, or I love paying for coffee for the person behind me in line if I'm doing a drive-through at Starbucks, or I love, buying someone's coffee, and just to create these warm connections, holding the door open. It sounds kind of cheesy, but it really, really, really makes a difference when you just are somebody who is paying attention to what's happening, and you might notice in a live setting where there's somebody who's interesting. I met a group that were from an accounting firm when we had a conference with Keep, which used to be Infusionsoft, in Phoenix. And I was walking to the convention center for the conference, and there were these three guys that were walking down the street, and they just, were smiling and looked friendly. We were stopped at the stoplight, and I just said, hey, I saw their little name tags. Yeah. And I said, hey, are you in town for this? Is it your first time? And we started chatting. And it was the first time they had come, and I ended up inviting them to a session that I did. And then when I was in the session, I used them as an example and kind of highlighted, their work. And it was just fun. We all connected with each other. We ended up going on, they became a sponsor of my work. I worked with one of the founders when he left. And so it's just taking the time sometimes to notice where there's an opportunity for a natural connection that really makes a big difference.
Oh, so here's a good question, and I think it leads into from what you've been saying, because being warm and kind is a tactic that you're using. So what qualities make people successful at applying this model and building relationships in this way? And I mean, you did speak to being an introvert and how sometimes these things don't work as an introvert, but what can you speak to a little bit about, what qualities make people successful?
Yeah, because I'll say the discernment that you will use for any kind of marketing advice is really in putting it through the lens of who you are naturally and how you're wired, and your ethics and your values, to make sure that the kinds of things that you're doing, activities that you're doing, are aligned. It's funny, when we talk about being relational, it's actually not a tactic. It's a way of being. It's a commitment and a belief that relationships are valuable, that, human beings are complicated, and there are natural ways in which you can be connecting with people. And so I think there is a vulnerability, ironically, at being more open to actually building relationships sometimes there are very tactical things that you do in business where you might run an SEO campaign, or you might, do specific things using tactics that are a little bit more transactional, building a product funnel, in order to get more people on your list. There can be good ways in which you build some kind of transactional components to your business that allow you to do business effectively. But when it comes to actually wanting to build real relationships with people, it requires some vulnerability. It requires you to hold and define really healthy boundaries, and to respect the healthy boundaries of others. Because when you are doing things like having a conversation with somebody and maybe wanting to see if you could be on their podcast, there's all of that like internal discernment that you're going to use about whether or not it's an appropriate thing to do. So that, I think, is one part of what is important, that you do choose the particular methods in the model that resonate with you and that you can feel honest and authentic about. I know in Heather's journey, what she said is, at first, it was really awkward getting it started, just extremely painful. But she was so open. She has such a growth mindset that she was not doing anything harmful. And what she recognized is that she needed to have more of a specific guide in order to make the conversations go smoothly. Once she did that and she began to build in some embedded relationships, then the community really started to kind of nurture itself as she expanded her team. So being open and vulnerable a bit, but having healthy boundaries, and then being willing actually to do more of the strategic work to figure out where is your time best spent in either building your career connections or building your business connections.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that sort of like beautiful mindset, or shifting your mindset around having like really authentic experiences with individuals that you want to have a relationship with, is shifting away from that sort of like empire centeredness, right? Because I think often we were told to be assertive and, like firm handshakes and like, step up to the plate and like really be in somebody's face right away. And I think this is a really sort of lovely, genuine focus and emphasis on why kindness is really important, why vulnerability is really important, even in a professional sense, because you really are sharing truly who you are in this space.
That's right. And I think one part that's just from an intersectional lens that we really talk about a lot here at the Learning Lab, for me and my identity as a white woman who's doing work very specifically and engaging a lot with the First Nation, Native communities here, Black, Latinx, Asian American, there's very specific different kinds of ways in which I need to be clear about how my identity is shaping conversations, and historically about what are levels of trust that are happening between and among communities. We have a lot of space here, literal physical space, but also just in our strategy and approach, where it's really important sometimes to have spaces where we only have just Native-owned business owners that might be gathering for an event. So I don't feel, left out or any way hurt, even though it's, our space, that I'm not there. I spent a lot of time in the early stages, really the first couple of years of work we did within relationship building, of just listening and really providing space and support for folks to be doing their own events. So for folks who might come from my background as a white woman doing this work, and then anybody's individual identity as you look at ways in which that impacts the way the world sees you, and also just ways in which you might have been socialized, I think those could be really important. So those are other dimensions that we notice, right? And me paying attention to, what might be somebody's background, what might be preconceptions they have about me or the space, and then tuning in very specifically to cues. If I notice they might feel overwhelmed with energy, if they are more introverted, I'll just really dial back my extrovert self and just spend a lot more time in kind of quiet reflection and just leaving more space in the conversation.
Oh, those are all really great. That's really great insight. Yeah. So we have another question around, what are the first steps you'd recommend for someone who wants to focus on watering holes and building an ecosystem for customers?
I know it's like the trite author answer, but there is a map, and a specific map in the Widest Net method that will help you to specifically discern what your ecosystem is. And so at first you want to look at what is that mission that you're on? What is this kind of change that you might want to make in the world? Maybe with a lens of building technology. And then what are your values? And then defining your ideal customer, or maybe the ideal place where you want to work in terms of like, where is a place that really has a problem or challenge that you can solve? When you know those first pieces, then you can do this very systematic ecosystem analysis, which is noticing, who are the other people who are involved in the space. And sometimes it's what you already know, where you begin to actually map it out along different parts of the ecosystem wheel. And then other times you're asking questions. I'm a big fan of asking on social media. So I might say on LinkedIn, what are your favorite podcasts about scaling a business? Because I might know the ones that I know, but then when I ask folks that are in my network, I begin to gather information and then go through a process of discernment. But that's usually the starting places. And then at first, allow yourself to have small tests without committing a huge amount of energy. So maybe you might attend a virtual event before you get on a plane and do a 3-day conference, with an organization, or you have a 10-minute conversation with somebody before you might actually decide to go to dinner with them. Just start small and see how it builds.
Oh, I love it. Love it. So we're getting really close to the end of our hour. And so I want to extend a huge thank you to you for spending the time with us. And for those who are with us, if you want to practice your ecosystem approach to building your network, I strongly encourage you to check out Chic Geek's Career Pathing Program. It's our unique take on the mentorship program, where we connect mentees, pathfinders, with new mentors, career guides, every month, and we do a short 30-minute digital conversation. It's a strategic way to build your network in technology, learn from other role models, and feel more supported in your journal. We're always looking for more career guides as well. And when we talk about career guides, we want to reassure people that you don't need to have 15 years of experience. We need role models at every stage of careers. And it's not about seniority, but about a willingness to really lend a hand and support other women in their career journey through tech. If you've enjoyed this event, as I know I have, I hope I'm not the only one. If you've enjoyed this event, please take a minute to leave your biggest takeaway in the chat. We'll be sharing the learnings in social and our marketing materials after this event. And thank you to everyone who joined us here today. I hope you have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time. But again, thank you, Pamela. It's been a real pleasure.
Yes, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed connecting again with this community.
And go and look up Pam's book, The Widest Net, coming out in November.
That's right. And thank you, Tanika, my assistant, who's here, who gave places. If you want to connect on LinkedIn, I'd love to connect over there.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.